when Isaiah wrote, maybe around 600 BC, the joy in his writing was this last part of Isaiah. The joy in his writing was that Israel was going home. This country that had earned God's displeasure, compromising too much with the surrounding world, and having paid the price, being carted off into captivity, what's known as the Babylonian captivity. Finally now, strangely enough, through the graces of a pagan king, they were returned to the promised land. They could now sing again the songs and eat the foods and pray the prayers. That was their faith. And so in that great joy, Isaiah reminds them as they recapture home. In a sense, I didn't realize it. That's one of the meanings of salvation, of to be saved, is coming home. It's finally like, who was the writer that said, coming home, and it was like the first time. But recognizing it, this is home. Well, and he reminds them at the same time, though, share your bread with the hungry, shelter the oppressed, these very practical and virtuous things. Shelter the oppressed and the homeless, clothe the naked when you see them. Do not turn your back on your own. And so he's reminding them, don't forget these virtues, in the celebration. But he also adds something that really struck me, particularly in connection with as Christ continues the Sermon on the Mount, which began you'll have 5 weeks in a row just up until Lent. Every week, this is the second of 5, where you'll be hearing from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You may want to take that chapter, I think it's chapters 5, 6, and 7, Matthew's Gospel, because this really is for Christ, the opening statement, because he's been under wraps, so to speak, during his young years, during his teenage years, during his 20s, and now at about age 30 is when he makes his appearance, sort of the inauguration address. And he sweeps up all that went before with Moses and the law. And the new lawgiver on the mount, just as Moses was, the new lawgiver lays out his plan. What follows Isaiah's words, to me, was captivating and unexpected. I don't think they were words I particularly ever listened to very well before. Because he says, do all these virtuous things, and we can easily say, yeah, that's nice. It's doing virtuous things. That's expected of us. But then he goes on to say, then your light shall break forth like the dawn. Your wound shall quickly be healed. What's he talking about? Your vindication shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. The light shall rise for you in darkness. The gloom shall become for you like midday. So you've not only completed the works of virtue, which you're expected to do, but assuming you did them with a good heart, because it's never guaranteed. If we do a lot of good things with a bad heart, I question how fruitful they are. I'm glad they're done. But presumably that these deeds, these very practical deeds, especially in dealing with the other, these deeds do something to you. At least that's the idea. They restore God's image in you. And so with them comes light, healing, glory from these things. I go over to the Sermon on the Mount. Of course, we heard the Beatitudes last week, which when you think of them, if you spend some time with them, you say, gee, when baby was just born, my child, my grandchild, and I'm there in the neonatal room in the hospital looking at the new babies, is that what I would wish on them? The Beatitudes, blessed are you who mourn, blessed are you who are persecuted. That's what Christ wished on his disciples. What do I wish? And so we see Christ having done the Beatitudes, and now he says, you are the salt, you are the light, you are. Now, I don't think he's just saying this is what you already are. I sense that this is what you're called to be. As my grace fills you over the course of a lifetime, this is what you're called to be. You're called to be. So you don't go hiding. You don't go disappearing into the woodwork. There's an overt, maybe a quiet, but an overt joy about you, a hope about you, even within a myriad of different personality types. There's something about you that's salt, that gives flavor, that lightens up, that shines light on, and that city on a hill. Something on you that people want to look at. It's a strange combination, isn't it? That somehow these virtuous things that we do are meant to change us on the inside. They're meant to, if we can look at our lives, this great romance, this great adventure of faith, if we can look at our lives as the gradual restoration of the image of God within us, which was lost in the garden, the gradual restoration of that image of God, that likeness of God within us, that, when you look at the great saints, they call it what's the word? That you become divinized. I mean, that's the goal. We share completely. We share completely in the gifts of God. That is, so these practical things end up changing us. I see even St. Paul. St. Paul is, of course, we know St. Paul, he had a strong ego. So did St. Peter. God used those gifts. Of course, that ego got in the way until they got deflated. Until they finally, each in his own way, got deflated enough to be open. When Peter falls on his knees, when the cock crows and Peter falls on his knees, I can almost see God the Father wiping the sweat off his brow and saying, finally, now I can begin to work with him. Now I can do something with him. That sense of that we, as Paul, even in these words, we see the humility of him. He says, I did not come with sublimity of words or wisdom, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. He said, I wouldn't want to be too eloquent because that would call attention to me and that would take attention from the cross, where all the power comes from. That would take attention from there. So as I look, I was thinking, okay, now I'm going to be, it's sort of really neat. I'm guessing there are a lot of college kids here. And I'm going to be at the college mass later this afternoon for the VMI kids and the W&L kids back in Lexington. And I'm saying, how do we, here I'm sending them back out to the campus where for some people on the campus, the word Christ is a taboo. Or Christian is like taboo, it's canceled. It's God, get it out of here. And for some of you, you labor in those circumstances, or at work, some of the companies now. You labor under those circumstances. And so I think it's a question of, Lord, you've been able to do it in every age. Can you make me open enough to you to make of me salt and light too? What I am just brings a beam, brings a flavor of your presence and offers it to those around. And that when I do these virtuous things that you've laid out, that it will change me on the inside. an example. I have an example of this. Was a conversation this past week of a person from an earlier parish who I had made a bad suggestion, it turns out. I knew there was a split in the family. And I said, well, it's been about, 10 years now? I said, do you think maybe it's time to mend the fences? And not a good idea. My interlocutor wasn't ready for that. The pain was still too great of abandonment or abuse. And I got to thinking that that's one of those things that if we keep them to ourselves, we're the ones that end up being a mess. When you hold on to a resentment, when you hold on to a grudge, you're the one that ends up being a mess. Kids, for the kids, there's an old expression here that you cut off your nose to spite your face. And that means that, yeah, you're mad at let's just say you're mad at your face. You're really mad at your face. And so what are you going to do to hurt your face? You're going to cut off your nose to spite your face. When you see, now who gets hurt there? You do. You're the one that gets hurt. And so I think that when we defer to Christ, even in these cases, in a sense, what's the forgiveness? Like a lot of these things, that the virtue is that you're letting go. The other person doesn't have to ask you to be forgiven. You don't have to be reconciled. You don't have to be friends again. You don't have to trust again. Maybe it was a bad idea in the first place. But it's that deferring to Christ to say, Lord Jesus, I'm going to put the justice part of this in your hands, and I'm going to write off this debt because I'm doing it for me. So you can either the sharing your bread, the sheltering the oppressed, the clothing the naked. In a sense, you can say, I'm also doing this for me. Because all these things with the right heart restore the image, the beauty of God within me. So I get to see, even here below, at least a little bit of what you had in mind, O Lord.